Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to my channel, Do Ministry Gaming, and in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my first day experience with 3.15 on Toxic Rain, Caustic Arrow, Raider, League Start, and to also try to give some additional tips for how you could potentially have a better campaign experience in 3.15, given that the game has become a little bit harder. All right, so first thing is that this video is specifically for a Toxic Rain and or Caustic Arrow type character in 3.15. And this is in relation to a video that I released yesterday for a Toxic Rain League Start guide for 3.15. And in that video, I kind of talked about some of the changes that were happening in 3.15 that might have impacted Toxic Rain and potentially especially as a league starter. And I kind of talked about my opinions about whether I felt like it was still a good league starter or not. And so today, I have league started with that character. It is a Toxic Rain Caustic Arrow Raider. And I just got through the campaign here. It took about 6 hours and 45 minutes, which is a very standard time for me. I would say that the build still worked quite okay as far as getting through the campaign. As you can see in the highlight clips here, this is basically Act 8, 9, 10 kitava kill. It still worked quite well up to the Atlas, which is where I am right now. And so I would say as a league start, it really wasn't all too bad at all. Now, important thing to note is that the game did get harder. I mean, and it's not because the build is much weaker than it was before at these levels. It is just that the monster life has gone up quite significantly, especially in Act 1. GGG made it a very specific point to make Act 1 very hard now and raised all the monster life and also added a bunch of additional monsters. And they're going to continue to do that for the rest of the acts in the game as time goes on. But they're really focused on Act 1. And so if you're fighting Brutus or you're fighting Merveil and it feels like it's taking forever, it isn't really because the build or the damage has gone down. It really is because the boss health has gone up. And so a lot of the bosses in the game are taking quite a bit longer to kill now, especially the early bosses in the early acts. Now, what happened actually in the patch notes is that the monster life across the board in the game has gone up, but it's gone up especially for Act 1, and it starts to taper off as you approach the Atlas and I think it was like level 84. So the monster life kind of tapers off, and you can really feel that in the game. In the first few acts, it really felt a lot slower than it used to, but I found that once I hit around that end of Act 4, Act 5 range, it started to feel really good again, and it really felt like it did before 3.15 in terms of a speed and power with both Caustic Arrow and Toxic Rain. And so really it's that early part that is made a lot slower now. But once you get your setup going and you've got your gems leveled up a little bit, I think you're going to find that your experience is still going to be quite good. Now, if you are having troubles progressing through the game, though, I do have some additional tips I'll share with you in this video that I felt were important, small things that made it a little bit better for me. I also had tips in yesterday's video that I suggested specifically for Toxic Rain build in terms of how to increase your power levels. And so make sure to check those tips out. I'm not going to repeat them in this video. This video is sort of additional new tips. Before I dive into that, also is that my character, as you can see on the screen, is actually primarily Caustic Arrow. The guide I put out is for Toxic Rain. The character I always play is Toxic Rain, and all my guides on my channel are for Toxic Rain with a supplement of Caustic Arrow. This time, however, I swapped it around. I'm manually casting a Caustic Arrow and had a Toxic Rain totem. I felt like that worked really well. I think the other way probably works too, but mana is a little harder to come by now. Everything just kind of costs a little bit more now. And Toxic Rain has always been notorious for having high mana cost. And so this felt really good when I played through it. I just wanted to try it. And so if you're Struggling with mana, if you're just playing Toxic Rain, I would maybe suggest you can try this, is make your Caustic Arrow your manual cast and have a Toxic Rain totem, or just play a Toxic Rain totem, period, or even Toxic Rain mines. You can do it however which way you want, even if you're a raider or a pathfinder, and so that works really well. But the gem links I went with, and you're seeing in the video here, is a 4-link Caustic Arrow, which is Caustic Arrow, Mirage Archer, Vicious Projectiles, and Void Manipulation. And then in the totem, I have a Ballista Totem with Toxic Rain. That's how you get the totem. And then Vicious Projectiles and Void Manipulation. So the very standard support gems there. And it felt really good. Caustic Arrow really was the main skill I was using to clear. I really didn't have to drop totems much more after Act 3 or so in terms of clearing. But when it came to boss kills, I dropped the 3 totems. I would have the Caustic Arrow up. I would have the Cursed Despair on. And that would be usually pretty good for the bosses. Now, that is the recommendation if you're having some mana issues. However, if you're not, you can still very much manually cast Toxic Rain, and I think it's going to work very well. So here are some other tips also that I found that might help you out as you progress. If you're struggling, especially in that early game where the game really did get harder in that Act 1, Act 2 range. And so the first is that if you've been following my build guides for Toxic Rain, in Act 1, you not only use Caustic Arrow, but you're also using Puncture and Burning Arrow as well very early on, especially with Brutus and Merveil. And then sort of after you get that Toxic Rain, Caustic Arrow set up 3 links, you kind of drop Puncture and Burning Arrow. But what I would say is, because the bosses are a lot harder to kill now, keep Puncture and keep Burning Arrow for a little while longer. Fights like Weaver have really been buffed up a lot. Aval Oversoul. So those kind of bosses are a lot tankier now. So, keep your Puncture and Burning Arrow a little bit longer if you can, if your socket pressure isn't too bad, and continue to use those to add that little bit of damage. And then the second thing here is don't forget to craft on your gear. So usually, actually, first of all, the question I get asked a lot is, when should you start focusing on resist, or when should you start to cap resist? I don't know if there's a set point or anything, but at least for myself, I typically find Act 1 to 3, I don't really need to worry about resist too much, other than the main resist for each act. So Act 1, you want cold resist. Act 3, you want lightning resist primarily. But anyway, sort of those first 3 acts, other than those, I don't really focus much on resist. Really, when I get to sort of mid, Act 4, Act 5 even, then I really start to think about capping my resist. Act 6, actually, even sometimes, I focus on getting my capped resists again. And so at that point, really think about crafting your gear. You really can craft quite a bit of resists on your gear. You can get, I think, like 20 resists on a piece of gear for 1 transmutation orb on a bench craft. So make sure, if your gear has an open prefix, make sure to craft life on it. If you have an open suffix, to craft a resist. And very quickly, you should be able to cap out your resist. And the game will feel much smoother if you have high resist than not, of course. So don't forget to craft your gear along the way, is what I'll say. Now, the final thing I guess I'll mention is, if you do decide to play Caustic Arrow like I have here, pick up a quiver. It doesn't matter what kind, what rarity, but pick up a quiver that gives you the arrows can pierce. And I believe that quiver is called the Penetrating Arrow Quiver, if you can. If you can find one, get one of those. Because with Caustic Arrow, the pierce is actually going to add another sort of Caustic Arrow puddle on the ground if the pierced arrow also hits an enemy, right? So if your first arrow hits an enemy, it'll drop a puddle. If the pierced arrow hits an enemy, it'll drop another puddle. And try to aim it so that you can hit 2 things in a line, and it'll drop 2 puddles and kind of increase your area of effect, I guess. Not really doubling your damage, but increasing your area of effect so you can hit more things and help your clear a lot. So I would definitely recommend that. But if you're sticking to manual casting Toxic Rain and using that primarily as a skill, I would recommend also a quiver, but a different one. I would recommend the one called Sharktooth Quiver. Sharktooth Quiver gives you life gain for each enemy hit by your attacks. And because with your Toxic Rain, you do hit quite a bit of enemies quite often, you will gain life back quite a bit more and sustain a little bit better. Especially now, monster density has gone up throughout the game, so it actually feels quite good to have that life gain on hit with Toxic Rain as you go. But anyway, guys, if you are playing Toxic Rain or Caustic Arrow, I think either one is still feeling really good for the game. I tried the Caustic Arrow this time around, supplementing with a Toxic Rain Ballista Totem. However, all my guides do it the other way, and I think it's still very much viable unless you're desperately running into mana issues, which you can resolve in other ways as well, such as Enduring Mana Flask. But if you guys are doing these builds, come on down to my channel if you have any questions. I stream on Twitch Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Times are in the description below. Feel free to pop by and ask any questions that you have. From there, you can also join my Discord and ask questions from there, or leave a comment in the comments section below if you're struggling. Happy to help you out. But I will say, the build itself is very quite capable of completing the campaign right now and getting you comfortably into the Atlas on a 4-link, which is what I did before you transition into that 5-link and some of the other stuff that I talked about in the video yesterday. All right, guys, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I hope your 3.15 league start is going well. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.